Hello and welcome everyone to the Wall Street Blockchain Alliance's Crypto Roundup for Friday, May 16th, 2025. Ron Quaranta here with my globe-trotting colleagues, David Brill and the one, the only Joshua Ashley Klayman. Good to see you both. I believe you're both traveling in Toronto. We'll get to that, I think, at some point. Before we begin, everyone, thank you so much for joining us. If you've got questions or comments, please put them in the chat. Obviously, nothing we're discussing is any kind of accounting, investment, legal, or tax advice, and that anything we're discussing really are our own personal opinions and not necessarily the opinions of our respective firms. I stand corrected. Josh is not in Toronto anymore. The Learjet landed at, Teterboro, Josh? But it is good to see you both. David's in the executive lounge, by the way, at the Toronto event, which we'll have to talk a little bit about. But it's good to see you both.
Good to see you, Ron.
Yeah.
So let's kick it off. It's been busy. Why don't we start with the obvious? Josh, I know you're back. David, you're still there. Consensus is happening this week, one of the industry's hallmark events. Would love to hear what you both got out of it. I couldn't be there, sadly, but I know you met with so many of our colleagues and members as well. David, you want to talk about it?
Sure. Well, I'm here inside, one of the rooms here right now. But no, I think there's a very good mood. I think people are really happy. The sort of foot's been off the crypto industry's throat, now. And we saw some broker FAQs dropped yesterday. And I think there's really a good mood. A lot of deals being talked about, a lot of, products coming to market. So I think it was a very good mood here. It's hard to gauge the crowd, but it's definitely a full crowd and it's a very big venue. So I think it's certainly been successful for me up here, but I think it's been a very positive experience for people who are here.
David, I'm just going to say it. Josh, it sounds like David's actually at a jazz lounge. He's not at a conference.
That's what I was saying.
I'm just going to say it.
Yeah, I was double checking my computer to make sure that I didn't have some thing in the background playing, like a news thing. Yeah, it sounds like quite the mood for 12 noon.
This is Josh's mood music background I have back here. I'm in the American Bitcoin Platinum Lounge here, and so it's nice. It's dark lighting and some piped in music, so you're the benefit of that too.
Well, David, it's good to see you, old friend. Josh, I wanted to weigh in. There's been news, obviously, while everyone was away. We've got some macroeconomic stuff to cover. Before we do that, and David, you alluded to this. Did either of you think we'd see SEC's Division of Trading and Markets put out an FAQ or kind of, a crypto activities guide in our lifetimes? Josh, did you see that? I was wondering if you had any thoughts about that.
I mean, I think it's perfect timing for it, right? I think this week, with so many people gathered, I think it's great that they released it at this time so that the excitement can build and people can actually appreciate it together. I think, if anything, it will help projects move forward, presumably. But I just mean that also with the interactions, because to echo David, I mean, I had some great meetings up there too, including people who flew from, halfway around the world or around the world, right? Just to be there for consensus. So, I mean, I think this is a long time coming. I have to delve through it. I can't say that I've familiarized myself in great detail with it, but yeah, I mean, I think the timing couldn't be better.
It is definitely my weekend reading as well. Josh, while we've got both you and David, I'm going to go on the legal side of it because I'm always astounded at some of the developments there. And I'm sure you both saw the news and may not have dove too deeply into it. But the Ripple settlement was essentially denied by Judge Torres. It sounds procedural. You both know I'm not a lawyer. For any of our colleagues out there that are watching this, absolutely correct me if I'm wrong. But part of my head exploded, Josh, when I read the news. Why did this denial come through? Everyone thought this was kind of a done deal.
So, I mean, I can't credit the right person because I don't have the name handy, but I read somewhere that someone put it in a very good way, which is people were saying, wait, is something really wrong here? And someone basically said, look, they tried to do it the easy way. Now they're going to have to do it the more difficult way.
Yeah.
But as you noted, it's procedural. So I think that's, it certainly must be frustrating for the teams on both sides to be having to go back and go through this and establish how it's extraordinary, right?
Mhm.
But I think I anticipate that this will not necessarily change the ultimate outcome.
Yeah.
One thing I'll add, Ron, is that look, the SEC took this position for the past 4 or 5 years, and
Yeah.
I think the court wasn't immediately willing to let it, change gears and just sort of go against all that guidance and all the arguing that they've done without going through some more hoops, like Josh
Mhm.
said. So I think it's procedural, but it's also more substantive that the court, I don't think, appreciates that the commission just flipped its position after strongly advocating a different position, and so it'll just take some time to work its way through.
And David, I know there are nuanced conversations here, and what you, Josh, alluded to. Just to be clear, out of my ignorance, this is not a hey, the fine isn't big enough perspective from the court, correct?
No, I don't think so. I mean, look, the court could have, like, if the court had an issue with what the fine was, that could have been addressed. I think that the court, really wants both parties to go through a full process to for the court to, change its analysis, on the sale of tokens, and the primary sale of tokens to institutions, and so that's what they're going to have to do.
Yeah.
So,
So,
but you have to. One thing you have to remember, Ron, is imagine if you're a judge, you've been ruling a case, and you've been, sitting over a case for a number of years, and the parties come in and are arguing a certain position. Then all of a sudden, both parties change, or at least the SEC changes its position like overnight, and wants the judge sort of, rubber stamp it, so to speak.
yeah.
The judge is not always going to react well to that. This is civil and not criminal, so it's a very different dynamic, and so I think that's what's playing out here.
Yeah, so the settlement will probably happen in the future. No predictions that we're making, but sometimes it's not the easy way out, David.
Yeah.
David, Josh, thank you both so much. And again, for everyone in the audience who's joining us, if you've got questions for David or Josh or I, please put them in the chat. We're happy to address them. David, Josh, it's getting hard to keep up with news. Josh, go ahead.
I just wanted to mention one thing that I am familiar with the broker clarifications.
Yep.
I don't recall the exact name of it that came out, but I thought it was really interesting. In one of the questions, it was talking about treating digital assets as financial assets for purposes of UCC Article 8.
Mm.
And I was, that's near and dear to my heart for a number of reasons, and some of which you guys know. I just thought that was particularly interesting, where they were talking about digital assets that are not securities and treating them as financial assets for purposes of Article 8, for security interests. The reason I mentioned that is that having a federal regulator specifically acknowledge that digital assets can in fact be financial assets for purposes of UCC Article 8, and that they're held by a securities intermediary. I mean, that's usually something that's at the state level, right? You look to the state level law, the UCC. And I think in some instances, we fielded questions saying things like, hey, well, we understand that it needs to make sense for digital assets to be financial assets for purposes of the UCC, but has there been any sort of case law on it, right, specific to digital assets? And so I think every little bit helps in terms of an overall acknowledgement. Certainly states like Wyoming already have things in their UCC that talk about, crypto custodians could be securities intermediaries. But I think that was one piece which, even though it hasn't little to do with the broker-dealer piece, that jumped out at me that I thought I would just give a plug to.
Josh, it's a really good point. And David, my next wager will be Josh raising UCC before the 10-minute mark or after the 10-minute mark. Josh, totally kidding. Obviously, it's a really important point. And you spearheaded the UCC deep dives, and we have to do more of them. It's such an important topic. When we look at what's happening in the news, David, Josh, one of the things I keep trying to wrap my head around, we've seen broker information from the SEC. We've seen crypto activities guidance just come out of the SEC. The clarity seems to be coming. I guess one of the questions I keep trying to wrap my head around is what's left besides the open court cases? Are we down to is a token security level dialogue, David, or is there more to it than that?
There's a lot of plumbing issues that still need to be addressed. Look, classification is really important. And I think even before then, just getting the stablecoin legislation approved. I really went back through and saw like some of the issues that the Democrats raised when they, refused allowing the bill to get through cloture. And it really seems like it's been more of a political play by the Democrats. I didn't really find anything substantive that they wanted to add to the bill. I mean, there were some tweaks that could have been made after it went through cloture. But my real hope is that, everybody can put politics aside and get the 60 votes to cloture so that that bill can move forward. And I will say this, one last thing is that,
yeah,
I think that the industry really wants to be bipartisan and has really reached out on a bipartisan basis. But this vote, I think, set back the comfort level with some in the industry around the Democrats, seriously embracing crypto. And I really hope that's just a blip and not, something that's more consistent.
David, it's a really good point. Josh, go ahead.
Yeah, I think this vote on stablecoin is going to be very important because in my view, I will not speak for anyone else, but in my view, this may have been viewed by many in Congress or by some in Congress and by those in the industry as this is low hanging fruit. This has been coming for years. This is something, where, okay, we're just getting it signed, it's low controversy. And so I think there is a bit of a fear or a concern, at least, that if this doesn't go through, that then will folks in Congress be like, we can't necessarily get behind some of your other ideas and initiatives because maybe, they're just not the will, right? And I think that is, I think there is a sense of like, if you couldn't get the votes for this, then are you really serious? So I think that's an important thing to bear in mind.
Josh, David, really good points. I don't know if both of you saw, but last evening there was a revised Genius Act proposal put forward. I haven't gone through the details of it. Political affiliation aside, a lot of it those changes seem to address Democratic concerns. There is a bit of the politics of it, David, and you and I have this conversation on a regular basis, particularly around, what the president may be doing on tokens. But to the point you're both raising, this is the low-hanging fruit and kind of needed. If we can't get this through, it might be a bumper ride. I think it was Senator Thune who anticipated it before the August recess. I could be misreading. Anyone in the audience, if you remember better than I do, please let us know. But again, really important stuff that we're talking about. So let's hopefully move that forward. David, Josh, as we talk about some of the political infighting that's happening, I wonder about some of the things that affect the market. David, I'm going to go to markets now. And when we look particularly at Coinbase, again, we don't work with them directly. Coinbase announced going into the S&P 500, which is ordinarily a big deal. The next day, there was a noted hack and some attempt to extort $20-something million from Coinbase. David, when we look at the market activity, has that been a drag on markets, or were you pleasantly surprised that the markets sort of shrugged it off?
Well, look, I think that we really have to take a moment and realize what a watershed event it is that, Coinbase is now part of the S&P 500. And I think actually by market cap, I think they're more like around like in the S&P 150 or 200. So I think this is great. I think that, for the crypto skeptics, now most everyone is going to have some exposure to crypto if they have any kind of, index funds. So I want to let's give Coinbase the moment here and celebrate that as an industry. The cybersecurity continues to be a tricky issue. I mean, I must have gotten 10 or 20 text messages in the last week having people all around the world accessing my Coinbase account. Not really accessing it, but fake messages and numbers to call. And so, look, it's unfortunate, but one thing, Coinbase has always been really transparent. So I think people appreciated Brian Armstrong, getting on X yesterday and maybe other platforms, but I've been at the conference and speaking to it and being candid about it. And, obviously as a public company, you need to do that, but I think they really went the extra leg here, and I certainly appreciate that.
Yeah, they've definitely one of the most of the professional tier of what's happening in the ecosystem. So seeing their kind of action and reaction to that, David, is a good point. Josh, David, I want to dive into that a little bit more because I've been struggling with something. Coinbase in the S&P 500 has big impact, David, not just for people to say, oh, I want access to crypto, but you look at it from the investment perspective, when you look at it from the retirement account or 401k perspective. And I heard this, shout out to Bloomberg Radio. I don't remember who it was, David, but an economist or an investment management company saying, well, what if our clientele don't want that risk profile in their portfolio, but now they're stuck with it because it's an S&P 500 company, and S&P 500 indices are some of the biggest in the marketplace ever. How do you respond to that, David? Because it is a valid point.
Well, they could also have United Healthcare, which is down 50% in the last month.
Wow, good point.
So, look, it's 500 companies, and this is one company in it. Look, I don't think in all of the S&P 500, there are companies that on an individual basis, everyone would want to buy. That's why you buy an index fund.
Right.
So, look, I basically would say, if people are so ideologically against it, then, you're going to have to go in a different direction. But look, there are companies that go in and out of the S&P 500. You may not agree with all the companies, what they do and how they make their money. But, look, some people don't like oil companies. They're in the S&P 500. So I kind of just brush it off as just, noise.
David, I'm with you, and I'll say one thing. This is going to sound more cynical than I mean it to sound. How many people know the companies in the S&P 500 index they're investing in anyway, and would even pay attention to it?
Totally.
Josh, I gotta imagine when you had when you had the weekly meeting with the Klayman family office, did the Coinbase getting on the S&P 500 come up in the team meeting for your investment managers?
I mean, my investment managers who are miners in the next room, not crypto miners. No, but yeah, I mean, I think your point, Ron, while at an individual level, people who may want to hold stocks look very closely. We see all kinds of shareholder activism across all kinds of industries, right? And some people say, oh, I wouldn't want to have shares in I work for a large law firm, so I have to be careful. I can't name certain industries or companies necessarily. But what I would say is, for purposes of funds that invest in S&P 500, index, I think the focus is on yield, right?
Right.
And so I don't think, to your point, I don't think that level of granularity is necessarily going to stop someone from investing in a fund, even if they don't like a particular single company. Because usually if they're doing an index, it's because they want returns, right?
And broad diversification. And, fly-by-night organizations don't generally get ascended into the S&P 500. So, David, Josh, I'm with you. I feel like it's a little bit of a nothing burger, particularly. David, I'm going back to macro. I've got to do it, Josh. And I know there's some legal stuff we got to talk about as well. And an important webinar happening on Monday. But, David, I distinctly remember earlier this year, you and I texting each other and looking at a VIX of 52, markets in the toilet. This is terrible. We're up now 11% on the year on Bitcoin. The VIX is at 17 and change, David. We've got lower inflation. What is happening in the marketplace?
Well, look, even though we don't give trading advice, we told people like when the VIX is over 50, it's a good time to buy, and it was a good time to buy. And again, look, I think people, like, you have to have a real thesis when you invest, whether you're like investing just, professionally or just something you're interested in or just watching your own portfolios. And so I think we all felt, the three of us felt that Bitcoin would have a good year this year. And obviously there was some noise. I think generally speaking, I think people agree that revisiting our trade balances with our trading partners is something we wanted to do. And I just think that some of the execution hasn't gone totally how we'd like it to. And I think over time it will get smoothed out. but it did create some uncertainty, and we had this big sort of divot in the market. And now we've kind of recovered from that. And look, I think, Bitcoin's on the precipice of breaking through an all-time high again. I sort of expect to see that this month. And so I think we're in a good place. And you'll talk about inflation, but inflation has gone down, despite all the economists or all the broadcast sort of folks who really seemed a little bit in shock about it. But now we're 2 months where the inflation's gone down. We haven't felt the impact of the tariffs yet, which we may at some point. But this economy is looking pretty good right now.
Yeah. Josh, I don't know if you noticed, David said we're probably on the midst of Bitcoin hitting an all-time high. And I'm going to shout out to Emma Channing, who called me out on LinkedIn. Thanks, Emma, for saying I chickened out on a new wager with David. That's not chickening out. That is me not making the same mistake twice. But David, I'm with you. I think, depending on where volumes land and how things proceed across marketplaces, I think we're in a relatively good position. One last macro, David, and I got to do it and then bring us back to law and crypto and the other stuff as well. Consumer sentiment is down. I'm going to say it. People in the audience and people watching can tell me I'm wrong. Soft data like consumer sentiment surveys are outdated and don't really measure consumer sentiment. David, Josh, tell me I'm wrong.
Look, I think it's important to have baselines. And I think it's important to do these surveys. I just don't know. And I think it's a theme across the data, across whether it's jobs reports, other parts of our ecosystem. But the data just lags. And I don't think it's really like in-time data. And I think in a few months we can look back and see. But I just don't think we don't get real-time data reported. And even the sentiments, I think, are really based on people's perceptions about what's going on, but it's not really what's actually going on.
Yeah, but policy is made based on that data, David. Policy decisions are made on that data, and I think that's always what's a bit concerning to people who look at markets. Josh, I'm sorry I'm going deep on the macro and market stuff. I just wanted to open it up a little bit. Are there other legal issues, David? If I could just bring it back to the legal stuff as well. Crypto M&A is picking up. If David and Josh, if I can mention it, we've got an important webinar happening on Monday. David Brill will be moderating. David Adlerstein from Wachtell, Molly Abraham, Elliot Chun. So it's going to be a great panel talking about crypto M&A. Josh, from a legal perspective and the work that you do, you've been super busy for years, unbelievably busy since January. Is that still going on? What is it looking like from your perspective?
You're on mute, Josh.
Or she's ignoring me, which is a definite possibility.
All right, well, I'm going to talk while Josh is figuring that out. So look, eToro had its IPO, and it went well, and it was oversubscribed, and they came out above. They raised the price, and the price has gone up. And I really see a trend here where public crypto companies are going to be able to use their stock as a tool to buy other companies. Mm-hmm. So in addition to whatever cash they have on hand, that they're able to use their stock as a tool to purchase other companies. So I think we'll see, and we'll talk about this more Monday on the webinar, but that is one of the elements of this market that you'll see.
Yeah. Josh, can we hear you?
No, we keep hearing, we can read your lips.
There we go.
Okay. Sorry about that. I was having some challenges. Yeah, no, I mean, I think, yes, absolutely. Things are extremely busy. I think people are very focused on a number of different things, obviously. But one big trend has been a focus on, as part of an entrance into the US or just, next steps, pursuing different types of banking opportunities, right? Whether either under like SBDI charters or, different states have different things, right? We've got Wyoming, we've got Connecticut, we've got the OCC trying to come on strong with federal options. You've got people considering whether, at least for those purposes, whether they should pursue a state path, right? Which maybe they have greater predictability over time versus a federal path, which could change every 4 years, right? In terms of M&A, I mean, we're definitely seeing that too. And I think that the webinar is extremely timely and led by some pretty heavy hitters, including, as you noted, David Adlerstein. I know our friends at Gnosis just recently purchased Singapore's headquarters. And so that was recently announced just in the past, I guess, 2 days, which we're very happy for them. But yeah, there's deals abound, and a lot is going on. Certainly, we also see that the massive acquisitions that we've talked about in our most recent session, of course, where we saw Coinbase's acquisition of Deribit, for example.
Yes.
So much stuff.
Josh, I'd like to peel the layers back of that a little bit if I could. You know, we haven't even gotten to the recent news. OCC has kind of eased up, let's call it, on banks holding crypto assets in the conversations to onshore companies that want to come to the United States or may have left the United States and want to come back. To the extent you can talk about it, how much of that news coming out of Washington, OCC, and easing up on banking restrictions for crypto companies informs their decision about going federal versus going state? Again, I don't know if you can speak to that in greater depth, but it is interesting because we're going to be doing a deep dive on that, as you know, and I'd love your perspectives.
I absolutely think that it has perked up people's ears and eyes in a way that they hadn't been focused on before, right? Because, even though some of the statements released by the OCC just in the past week, they were kind of reiterating things that they'd already talked about. The moves by the OCC and the FDIC have created, without being too strongly saying it, a much friendlier environment. And so some people say, oh, well, look, maybe initially it's a smoother glide path to go in the federal way. I would just say that when you're thinking long term, though, about a business, and this is not one way to do, there are different answers for different companies, right, and different projects. But if you're planning to have a long-term future in a business that you're building in the U.S., right, then presumably, sorry for the thunder in the background.
Oh, it's heading my way. It's about 2 minutes away from me.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, then having a long-term path and saying, look, this state, for example, has historically been friendly to crypto. So maybe for staying power and consistency and the ability to sort of predict what's going to be in the future, maybe that's a better thing. Now, some may say, well, for federal, yes, there was a big change now, but it's unlikely to really go back to ever where it was under the Biden-Gensler days, or whatever we want to call them. Nevertheless, I think that plays in a lot. But I think, yeah, there are so many differences between and among the states for purposes of pursuing one of those paths, including in respect of like residency requirements, what kinds of anyway, I won't go into the details. If people want a deep dive, we'll do a deep dive on that at some point. But I think this is absolutely on people's minds.
David, I feel like Josh just volunteered for a deep dive webinar on this. David, from your perspective at the work you do with your organization, would love your perspective on these clients coming back to the U.S.
Yeah, look, we certainly have conversations. Like, I think clients are looking at it, and the real question is sort of law and taxes. So if you want to reshore, or if you want to be domiciled here in the U.S., corporate taxes are much higher here than they are, if you do it in Klayman, where you have like a Klayman with a BVI sub. So that's one thing to consider. On the other hand, the law is more established here, or is getting more established, and I think that's a plus. I think you also have founders and other employees who want to be in the U.S. and don't want to have to go through hoops to not be in the U.S. So it's really a give and take. But I think one thing we've underestimated is not only have we had 4 years where we've had a difficult regulatory environment, we've had these 4 years where we haven't been able to ideate with our regulators and sort of have these conversations. So not only have we lost the last 4 years, but we also lost that time to ideate and have these conversations and figure out what works and what may work. So we're really in a way someone like 4 or 5 years behind where we could be. But I think companies are being smart about going in and talking to their various regulators. And I think companies have really been drawing up plans, waiting for this moment. And now they're actively going to market and trying to sort these questions out.
David, it's a really good point. There's a sense of catching up to the stuff we could have accomplished 4 years ago, call it. We're going to wrap it up a bit early. Josh and I have thunderstorms rolling in our respective estates here out in New Jersey, and I see lights flickering. Josh, which always worries me, and David's got his jazz lounge time he's got to spend there. Next week is Digital Assets Week. We'll be loitering around New York City with several of our colleagues. David, Josh, what do you have coming up in the coming week?
Well, I'll go first. I'll be up here until tomorrow. I will be up here until tomorrow. And then I will be actually in New York next week. So I hope to see both of you at some of the digital asset events. I'm going to be reading about the broker rule. Yep. I'm also going to just be, doing a lot of catch-up work and things like that. But I also will be watching some of the price action. And I do expect, and it could even happen after we close today, but I do expect that we'll sort of break through this range and push towards an all-time high.
He's pushing for another wager, Josh, and I'm not going to fall for it. No matter what Emma Channing says. Josh, what are you doing this weekend?
So this weekend, I think I'll be reading, working, and recuperating from David. I sincerely hope that your flights home are smooth. I would say it was like cancellation city the past few days. So just, may the force be with you. Or whatever. Next week I'll be in New York for much of the week. So I look forward to seeing others as well. And then the following week I'll be heading out to Las Vegas when Bitcoin Las Vegas is there. So have a bit of a rest week, so to speak, next week.
I will see you both in New York. I'm going to spend my time over the weekend, Josh and David, doing what every fun person does, which is reading red line Senate bills over a glass of wine. But it is good to see you both. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us. If we didn't catch questions that you wanted to ask, info@wsba.co. We will see you next week. Josh, David, always good to see you. Take care, everyone.
Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.